Hello and welcome, PPL fans. We're back, me and Lux, for another match of the week preview, whatever you want to call it, you know? So this week,
Exactly.
it's the first week of playoffs, so we're back at it. Took a few weeks off, you know how it is. I was on vacation, you know.
I was also on vacation.
But we're back, and better than ever, probably. Anyways, Addy versus Q. This is an interesting matchup. So the way PPL did their playoffs is higher seeds get to pick their opponents. I wasn't really paying too much attention, so I don't know exactly how it went down, but these are the matchups we got. And didn't they already play in the regular season?
I'm pretty sure they played, and I'm pretty sure Addison won. I will double check that real quick though before.
We don't want to spread misinformation on the internet.
Yes.
But anyways, I'll start talking about the matchup overall.
They did in fact play in week 8, and Addison actually lost.
Ooh, crazy. So we're looking for some revenge here, potentially?
We're looking for revenge, and another thing to note is that Addison is the lowest of the top 4 seeds, so she did not actually get to pick her opponent. She essentially got left with Q as the last option.
Alright.
At least that's what I'm gathering from the standings.
So now that we're updated from the lore, so
the storylines have been updated, yeah.
Yeah. Game plans overall, what are we thinking? So for Q, it's pretty straightforward, I think. You want to win with the Lilligant, if at all possible. Just Victory Dance, Dual Stab Ice Spinner is a massive threat. Clear Amulet specifically makes it so that Arcanine cannot intimidate you and is therefore not a reliable check. So, I don't know if you're aware, but Arcanine's pretty bulky. However, Lilligant at +1 with Hustle, very strong. And if you take Intimidate out of the equation, +1 CC is near killing max defense Arcanine from full. And it can't switch into a neutral one.
That's true, and with Adamant even has a role to kill if you don't respect like Scarf Zapdos and stuff like that in this matchup, which if you're willing to do that, that could be very threatening for Addison to just lose a Lilligant check like that.
Yeah, for sure. Clear Amulet also would help against Intimidate Tauros, although we think that's very unlikely to come. But Arcanine is the main target of that item. Could also be Leftovers bulky on that thing, set up a little bit easier on the King Gambit, on the Gastrodon, you know, that sort of thing. You're still not really going to set up on Glimmora, Gardevoir, Pult, but you know...
And especially on Arcanine or Zapdos.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'd be able to take a defensive Flare Blitz if you're bulky with the +1 defense, but I don't know, we haven't checked that calc out. But yeah, mainly you're looking to set up on the Gastrodon, the King Gambit, mainly those two. And if you're able to force a switch versus potentially Glimmora or, you know, Gardevoir, you can hit the Arcanine on the switch with CC, something like that. Dragapult kind of naturally checks the Dual Stab, which is why you really want Ice Spinner this matchup. Also helps with the Galarian Zapdos.
True. Another thing that, if you see CD Arcanine when it comes in, next time you click Victory Dance, there's practically nothing to stop you to just win the game. So, Addison really wants to make sure that that at least doesn't happen to her, because he might just outright lose the game from there.
Yeah, that's definitely like the #1 threat on Q's side. But then you also have supplementary mons like the Iron Moth, which is a pretty big threat offensively. The Dragapult can like naturally check it. Like Dragapult in this matchup naturally checks several mons, but its HP is very valuable in this because it can't do like all of it at the same time. It's kind of like you can check the Volcanion, the Thundurus, the Iron Moth, or the Hisuian Lilligant, but you can't check multiple ones. You have to pick which one you need your Dragapult's HP for. So that'll be an interesting thing to see in this matchup. A Booster Energy Iron Moth with speed. Potentially we'll be able to trade HP with the Dragapult. So that would be one way of weakening the Pult into range of Lilligant, if it's not already in range of +1 Ice Spinner. But it could be Scarf, you know, you need something faster than the Booster Moth, the Lilligant. Dragapult doesn't have amazing offensive capabilities this matchup, just because there is a Grimmsnarl, which is like a natural check to the offensive typing of Dragapult.
And same with the Meloetta as well, which can Terra Fairy and then also function as a pretty solid Dragapult check on its own.
Yeah, definitely those two are going to really slow down the Dragapult, which in most matchups there isn't really that kind of luxury, so that's pretty lucky for Q. Anyways, if you're looking to set up the Lilligant, there's a few things you can do. You can disguise your Zoroark as Lilligant, and then that might potentially bait Addison to switch into the Lilligant checks early and get them weakened by the Zoroark. It's kind of hard to make that read, you know? Like, is it a Zoroark or is it a Lilligant? You don't know for sure. And there's stuff like... go on.
Thank you. It also helps that the only things that can really switch into Zoroark, at least a Ghost Stab, are Kingambit and Tauros, which don't really want to come in on a lot of other mons on Q's team, which makes Zoroark more potent, I wanted to say.
Yeah, especially the Tauros doesn't seem like a very likely bring, because you kind of need a lot of Pokemon on your team, like just mandatory defensive checks. Like the Arcanine is pretty mandatory, I think. It's a great mon. Gastrodon, it's not amazing, but we do feel like it's a necessary evil to bring that to like slow down the Volcanion, the Thundurus, the Iron Moth. These are all huge threats. You need checks for them, you know? It's not,
exactly.
It's not really a situation where Addison can really out-offense Q. It's just not going to work out that way. You need defensive checks in this matchup.
Another thing that the Zoroark could do that I just thought of is if you really want to focus on the Iron Moth or the Volcanion, like breaking the team, you could bait with the Hisuian Zoroark and then Grass Knot the Gastrodon at like with like Specs or like Life Orb and do a lot of damage that way. Since the Gastrodon can't really afford to switch out from that point.
For sure. Getting Chip on the Gastrodon opens up the Moth. The Thundurus, it's kind of hard because unless Gastro is dead, it'll always be kind of a thorn in its side unless the Thundurus is packing Grass Knot itself. But it's really hard to fit all the moves you need on Thundurus. You want T-Bolt, Dark Pulse, Sludge Wave, Psychic. Psychic would be a good option to hit Glamora, and then being neutral to Rotom-Mow, Gastrodon, and Pult. That is an option. Dark Pulse is similarly good against Pult and neutral against Gastro, Rotom-Mow. So if it's Dual Dance, I'd expect T-Bolt, Dark Pulse. It could also just be Boots 4 attacks, get all the coverage you want, or Agility 3 attacks, you know. Thundurus has a few options. The Life Orb Zoroark is an interesting point you bring up, because it also wants all the coverage it can get versus this team. Fighting move for Kingambit, Grass Knot for Gastro, Shadow Ball for, you know, just general things, Hyper Voice.
And Shadow Sneak is nice as well to be able to pick off a Dragapult if needed.
Yeah, so a lot of mons only have 4 move slots, and that's kind of an issue in this matchup. You're gonna want to predict what Addison is gonna bring, and then prep your coverage moves accordingly, I think. That's a risk I'd be willing to take in this matchup. I don't know if he sees it the same way.
Yeah.
But for me, I think the Rotom-Mow is probably not coming, so I would maybe forego the Sludge Wave on Thundurus, stuff like that.
Yeah. I would have to agree there. I don't see the Rotom-Mow as particularly likely, mainly just because it doesn't do too well into Lilligant, Moth, and Cleavor, in my opinion. Then it can get baited by the Hisuian Zoroark as well, so...
Yeah, it's also kind of hard-walled by Thundurus. Yeah, a little bit taken advantage of, even though it's a nice thing to outspeed Volcanion and do a lot. Again, I don't think Volcanion is the #1 threat you need to be worried about here.
No, exactly, and even then, you still always have Gastro for that. Can run Solar Beam, but you can easily scout for that by going Pulled or running Rindo. Burning Rindo is nice, but even then, you're giving up a Volcanion to burn a Rindo.
Yeah,
which doesn't
not
seem
a great
most value in this matchup.
Yeah. So let's look at it from Addison's perspective now. How do you want to win this game?
I think hazards are very good. Q doesn't really have removal, obviously, so getting up hazards with Glamora just spikes, T-spikes, rocks, if anything. Because it's pretty free. I could see Addison trying to bring Corrosion Toxic for Iron Moth Bronzong if she's scared of those, but I think overall just getting your hazards up, this matchup is so valuable, and I think Toxic Spikes, if you're bringing it as like a Moth check, getting Toxic Spikes on a potential U-turn and forcing him on to get poisoned is really nice in my opinion.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily force a poison because Bronzong can come in quite easily on Glamora.
Yeah.
But even
Bronzong
then,
can come in.
So like the main thing I want to point out with T-Spikes versus Corrosion, if you get the Toxic Debris up and the Iron Moth comes in to absorb it, that might just burn the Moth's booster energy earlier than Q might want. So that's an important thing. Basically, if you force the Moth to absorb T-Spikes, you remove the threat of like a booster speed endgame, or you force it to happen way too early, and it's way easier to check. So that's an important thing where I would kind of shy away from the Corrosion set, even though there is a Bronzong and you can't really do too much to it otherwise. Just getting up hazards on the switch to Bronzong, and then it's a Bronzong, it's not hard to switch into, you know? You don't really lose much, you get your hazard up, and you can like pivot out. Is really not the end of the world.
Yeah, I do think that even though the Bronzong can come in easily on Toxic Spikes, the issue after that as well, even if you don't have like Booster Moth, is getting the Moth back in from there, because it's not going to come in on a lot of mons on Addison's team that we're expecting at least.
Yeah, and Moth doesn't want to come in directly on Glamora, so it's like a little bit of a sequence to get it in. You have to force Glamora out, and then you can get your Moth in, but it's not always the easiest mon to bring in, Iron Moth. Anyways, I think the hazards is a really big part of this matchup. You might see a lot of boot spam by Q, kind of like in response, but hazards plus I think more utility favored Dragapult. I'm thinking Wisp, U-turn, Dragon Darts, maybe Hex with a lot of HP. Like we said, HP is really important on this Dragapult to like check the threats. So kind of leaning into that side, going bulky Pult, Will-O-Wisp, is nice just to burn something, because Iron Moth is not going to want to switch into Dragapult, so it's pretty much a free Wisp. I guess the Volcanion as well.
You get a free Wisp on. Yeah. I was gonna say you get a free Wisp on the Grimmsnarl pretty easily, or the Meloetta.
Yeah.
If it's on the Meloetta, you offset leftovers. Grimmsnarl puts it on timer if it's Light Clay or something like that, or like Helmet.
Yeah, and then just generally U-turning with spikes up is a known great thing to do. And then you can get in things like your King Gambit on the Grimmsnarl, start pressuring things. King Gambit offensively is really great. Defensively, it's not the best here. It can be like a decent 1-for-1 mon with a Choppleberry, trying to bait a fighting move and then killing back. But, I mean, the Lilligant is still going to kill through Choppleberry with Hustle. So that's something to keep in mind, but it would help versus like a low kick Zoroark, Focus Blast Zoroark, Focus
or like
Blast
a Cleaver
Thundurus,
close combat
Cleaver close combat, Bronzong Body Press as well. If you trade for the Bronzong, all of a sudden your Gardevoir's opened up, your Glamora's opened up, stuff like that. So I think Gambit is mainly going to be used as a Grimmsnarl abuser.
Yeah,
like it comes in pretty freely, and then you can hit something. Or you can trade it for Bronzong HP. You can Sucker Punch the Zoroark, Sucker Punch the Moth. Like, Sucker Punch is such a mind game. It's kind of hard to rely on, but it is a useful tool to have in your toolkit,
I would agree there. It might also force the Zoroark, which we already said had quite the for move slot syndrome, to run like Wisp or something to not have to deal with the Sucker Mind game. Yeah. Which could be nice as well.
Yeah, and like initially we were thinking potentially Encore Lilligant into King Gambit would be nice. But like the more we looked at it, the more we realized just Victory Dance 3 attacks is probably your best bet.
Yeah. Speaking of the Lilligant though, that's a pretty big threat for Addison, so we tried to think of some ideas to use the Lilligant to get Addison some momentum and maybe force it out and get a kill. We came up with the following Zapdos set, if you want to present that.
Yeah, so Zapdos, historically in OU and UU, just standard formats, it's run a lot of like Scarf Band, that sort of set. like as a breaker, revenge killer type thing. But in Draft League, it's actually very common, popularized a bit in DPL by Rob Jr., if I remember correctly, to bring like max defense, Rocky Helmet, Zapdos. And it's like stood the test of time. Every time I see Galarian Zapdos in draft, I'm like, wow, defensive Zapdos is putting in so much work this game. And I don't know if that's like a coincidence or not. If, like, all the matchups just tend to be good for defensive Zapdos, but here I think it also works. Offensive Zapdos is cool and all, but defensive can really help check the Lilligant. Now the main problem is it's pretty easy to chip Zapdos in range of +1 Ice Spinner. Like, it's not that hard, but what we came up with is max defense Zapdos with Mirror Herb, and you always just hard into it on Lilligant. And what does this do? Well, if the Lilligant clicks Victory Dance, you use your Mirror Herb, you get the +1 defense. So basically, it's back to a neutral in the 1v1. Like, the +1 Lilligant attack cancels out with the +1 defense on the Zapdos, and you're still a max defense Zapdos versus a Lilligant. So you're really taking nothing from these hits. And not only that, you use your items. See, we can run Acrobatics. Now, an important thing to point out is that if Lilligant does not Quiver Dance, or not Quiver Dance, Victory Dance, Acro will still kill, because it's 4 times weak, even with 55 base power. This means that the Lilligant doesn't have the defense boost, so we're just killing it anyways. So that's an important thing. And then if we do get the Mirror Herb off, we take nothing from Ice Spinner, we kill it back, and then, you know, there's not really much on Q's team that wants to take the hit. You know, +1 Zapdos will outspeed the whole team, because you get the speed boost from the Victory Dance, and you have the defense boost and your max defense, so physical attackers revenging is completely out of the question. You're faster than anything besides Booster Moth, or like Scarf Thunderous, which, you know, Booster Moth can get taken up by T-Spikes early. Scarf Thunderous I think is extremely unlikely. So what's going to take the hit from +1 Zapdos? Even if you're max defense, that's still a lot of attack. And with a moveset of Thunderous Kick and Acrobatics, you don't really need much more than that. So the best option to take the hit, we've like kind of theoried, is the Terra Fairy Meloetta. And it'll take the hit and kill back, but the main thing is this really opens up the Dragapult. If you look at it, Dragapult, you know, with Hazard's U-turn, it's already a decent like pivot, a threat, you know. But when you're weakening the Meloetta by that degree, it becomes so much easier to open up the Dragapult. And yeah, so if the Dragapult can start get going, then Addison can really like work towards the end game.
The other thing that could come in, we thought, was the Grimmsnarl to Thunderwave to Zapdos and then potentially let Meloetta come in for free afterwards and then revenge. But realistically, that kind of gets the same result, where you weaken a Dragapult check, which makes Dragapult more free in the end. And if Meloetta's not Terra Fairy because the Grimmsnarl is there to check the Dragapult, then that problem gets even more so exacerbated.
Yeah, Q's basically forced into sacking one of his fairy types or a decent amount of HP on it. So that could be really useful. Maybe not something you plan on 100% going off, but it's always nice to have text like that in your back pocket to kind of like turn a negative, you know, a free Victory Dance into a positive. Now you have 1.5 kills with Zapdos.
Exactly.
So stuff like that, I think Addison really has to lean into. I don't think she's favored in this matchup at all. I think it's more of an uphill battle, so bringing text like that, Chapel Berry Gambit, the Mirror Herb Zapdos, kind of getting a surprise factor, surprise KO, that's going to be really important in swaying the match in her favor.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there.
Alright, I think that's pretty much it. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so, no. I think that it would be the one thing to mention is we kind of established that for Addison, the 7 mons that we kind of can see bring is top six of Dragapult, King Gambit, Glamora, Zapdos, Gastrodon, Gardevoir, and Arcanine. It's kind of tough to decide which you bench there. We came to the conclusion of either Gastrodon or Gardevoir, but both do have good benefits, and the negatives of not bringing them are also kind of high.
Yeah, it's kind of like 7 mons that you want to bring. It's always a tough thing when that happens. But on Q's side, pretty much anything is viable. You can bring pretty much anything except Sandaconda, we think.
Yeah, I would agree. One last thing, we did say that Addison's probably not favored in this matchup, but do you think this is like nearly like unwinnable, or like do you think?
Oh, it's definitely winnable. It's just
Yeah.
you need to have something go your way. If you just play like, twiddle your thumbs in the back and you just wait for things to happen, Q is gonna win this game. Like, the offensive pressure is going to eventually break through. So you really need to get something going in the early to mid game. And of course, King Gambit with a 6 fallen or 5 fallen, it can always pull back some games. You know how it goes.
I think that is most of it then.
All right, we're gonna wrap it up here. Definitely leave some comments if you want to, predict whatever. Come back after the game to see what we got right, what we got wrong. Roast us a little bit. It's always fun. Anyways, that'll be all. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you for semifinals.
See ya.